Your services are no longer required. Leave now so Savannah can handle the toast. That was the text my father sent me while I was on my knees in a utility closet, holding a wrench to stop a sewage leak from ruining his gala. I didn't even have time to wipe the grease off my hands before the second notification hit the family group chat. It was from my sister, Savannah, who was standing on stage 20 feet away. A single emoji. A party hat. She was celebrating my erasure while I was literally cleaning up their mess. The disrespect wasn't just loud, it was absolute. Before I tell you exactly what happens when you fire the person holding the kill switch to your entire business, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story goes. I didn't storm the stage. I didn't throw my wrench at the champagne tower, or scream at my sister to get off the microphone. That's what a victim does. And I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a creditor. I stood up, smoothed the front of my ruined dress, and walked out the service exit. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, muting the applause and the jazz music instantly. The silence of the parking lot hit me like a physical weight. It was cool and dark, the only light coming from the glow of the venue windows, where my family was currently toasting to their own brilliance. I got into my sedan, locked the doors, and placed my laptop on the center console. My hands weren't shaking. They were terrifyingly steady. I opened the lid. The screen washed the car's interior in a harsh blue light. I navigated to the business banking portal. I didn't need to look up the password. I had created it. I didn't need to look up the security questions. I was the security. There it was. The Vows and Vines operating reserve. Balance, $640,000. That money wasn't profit. It wasn't an investment from Richard's brilliant networking. It was my life. It was my 401, my liquidated stock portfolio, and a personal loan I had leveraged against my own credit 3 years ago when Richard had gambled away the operating capital on a sure-thing real estate deal that turned out to be a swamp. I had poured that money in to keep the lights on, to keep the vendors paid, to keep the illusion of their success alive. And for 3 years, I thought that if I just saved them enough times, if I just made myself indispensable enough, the gratitude would eventually turn into love. But sitting there in the dark, watching the cursor hover over the transfer button, I finally understood the math. I realized why Richard had sent that text. I realized why Savannah had sent that party hat. It wasn't because I had failed. It was because I had succeeded too much. To a narcissist like my father, my competence wasn't a gift. It was an insult. Every time I fixed a leak, he ignored. I was holding a mirror up to his negligence. Every time I balanced a ledger he couldn't read, I was highlighting his illiteracy. He didn't hate me because I was useless. He hated me because I was the living, breathing proof of his own inadequacy. And Savannah? She didn't want a sister. She wanted a stage. My existence crowded her spotlight. They didn't fire me to improve the business. They fired me to exercise their own insecurity. They needed to erase the witness to their incompetence, so they could finally pretend the magic was theirs all along. You want the stage? I whispered to the empty car. You can have it. But you don't get to keep the lights I paid for. I selected external transfer. Destination: Jasmine Personal Savings. Amount: $640,000. The screen asked for a final confirmation. Are you sure? I looked up at the venue. I could see the silhouettes of the guests moving past the windows. They were drinking my wine, standing on my floors, celebrating a success I had built brick by brick. Richard was probably shaking hands right now, taking credit for the ambiance. Savannah was probably laughing, thinking she had finally won the game because the competition had been removed. They thought the money was part of the furniture. They thought my support was a natural resource, like air or sunlight, something they were entitled to just for existing. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. A green checkmark appeared. Transaction successful. It was done. The kill switch had been pulled. The money was gone. And inside that building, the invisible clock began to tick down to 0. I sat back against the headrest and waited for the lights to flicker. I watched the progress bar inch forward. 20%, 40%. That number $640,000 wasn't just a figure on a ledger. It was the price of my own erasure. 3 years ago, Richard had come to me, sweating through his linen suit, admitting he had leveraged the venue's operating capital on a high-risk crypto scheme that went to 0 in a week. It's just a cash flow issue, Jasmine. He'd lied, but I knew better. It was a death spiral. I didn't have that kind of cash sitting around. I was 29, working as a forensic accountant for a firm that audited cartels. I knew how to find money, but I didn't have a fortune, so I built one out of my own future. I liquidated my grandmother's inheritance. I drained my retirement fund, taking the tax hit. I took out a personal loan against my credit, which was perfect, unlike his. I didn't give it to them. I wasn't that stupid. Even then, I structured it as a secured capital injection. I told Richard, "This is a loan. The venue is the collateral." He had signed the papers without reading them, too busy looking for a mirror to fix his hair. He thought it was just paperwork. He didn't realize he was signing a confession of ownership. For 3 years, I became the ghost in the machine. I was the shadow operator. While Savannah was posting TikToks about CEO energy from the bridal suite, I was in the basement negotiating payment plans with food distributors who had blacklisted Richard. While Richard was buying rounds for investors he couldn't afford to impress, I was auditing the payroll to make sure the single mothers working the kitchen line didn't get a bounced check. I worked 18-hour days. I slept on a cot in the office. I aged 5 years and 3, and every time I saved them, every time I magically made the numbers work so they could keep playing dress up, they resented me for it. They hated me because I was the one person who knew the emperor wasn't just naked. He was broke. They called me rigid. They called me a buzzkill. They told me I lacked vision because I refused to buy a $50,000 ice sculpture machine when we hadn't paid the electric bill. They thought the money was infinite because I made it look that way. They thought the safety net was gravity, just a law of nature that would always be there. The progress bar hit 99%. "You wanted vision?" I whispered. "Here it is. 100%. Transfer complete." A notification popped up on my screen. Alert. Primary operating account balance below threshold. Merchant services suspended. I looked up at the venue. It started subtly. The music didn't stop, but the rhythm of the party broke. I saw the bartender swipe a credit card. He frowned. He swiped it again. He held it up to the light, then shook his head at the guest. The guest pulled out another card. Swipe. Decline. Then, the smart lighting system, which was leased through a vendor that required a real-time autodraft for the high-voltage grid, missed its ping. The chandeliers flickered. Once. Twice. Inside the glass walls, I saw the shift. The laughter stopped. The bartender was now holding up his hands, explaining to a crowd of wealthy investors that he couldn't open a tab. Richard was storming toward the bar, waving his arms, probably shouting that it was a glitch. It wasn't a glitch. It was a cardiac arrest. I had just removed the heart, and the body was starting to realize it was dead. My phone lit up. It started with a single vibration against the center console. Then another. Then a continuous, angry buzz that rattled the plastic cup holder. I glanced down. The screen was lighting up with notifications so fast they blurred together. "Richard, what did you do? The system is down. Richard, fix this now or you're dead to me. Savannah. My card got declined in front of the mayor. You are ruining my night. You're so jealous it's pathetic. Cynthia. Your father is having chest pains. Put the money back, Jasmine. Stop playing games." They still didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought this was a negotiation tactic. A little flare-up of rebellion that could be squashed with threats and guilt. They didn't realize that you can't negotiate with a burning bridge. I picked up the phone. I didn't type a defense. I didn't remind them of the 3 years I spent keeping them afloat. I simply took a screenshot of the transfer complete screen on my laptop, the one showing the zero balance in the operating account, and sent it to the group chat. I added 2 words. Service terminated. Then I put the car in drive. I looked up one last time. The venue was in chaos. The emergency lights had kicked on, bathing the gala in a harsh, unflattering white glare that exposed every water stain I hadn't had time to paint over. Guests were streaming out the front doors, looking confused and annoyed. Waiters were standing around with trays of melting ice. It was over. I had won. I could leave. I took my foot off the brake. The car rolled forward inches, and then the side door of the venue burst open. Richard came running out. He wasn't the composed, charming host anymore. His tie was undone, his face was a mottled purple, and he was sprinting across the asphalt with a speed I didn't know he possessed. He wasn't running to stop the guests. He was running at me. Psychologists call this an extinction burst. It's what happens when a toxic system finally loses its fuel source. When a controller realizes their control is truly gone. They don't surrender. They don't reflect. They detonate. They ramp up the aggression to a level of insanity, hoping that the sheer shock of it will force the victim back into submission. They would rather destroy the entire world than let their possession walk away. Richard didn't run to my window to talk. He threw his body onto the hood of my car. The metal buckled with a sickening crunch. He scrambled up, slamming his palms against the windshield, his eyes bulging, spittle flying from his mouth as he screamed something I couldn't hear through the glass. He looked deranged. He looked like a man who would tear the car apart with his bare hands to get to me. I gasped, my foot slamming onto the brake. And then, the rearview mirror exploded with red and blue light. 2 police cruisers screeched into the lot, boxing me in from behind. Sirens wailed, cutting through the humid air. Richard didn't look surprised. He looked triumphant. He slid off the hood, pointing a shaking finger at me through the windshield as the officers stepped out, hands on their holsters. "Arrest her," he screamed, his voice cracking with manic energy. "She's right there. She embezzled $640,000 from the company accounts. I want her in handcuffs." My heart hammered against my ribs. He hadn't just chased me. He had called the police before he even ran out the door. He was willing to send his own daughter to prison to save his ego. The lead officer walked toward my door, his face grim. "Driver, hands where I can see them. Step out of the vehicle." I looked at Richard. He was smirking now, panting heavily, straightening his jacket as if the arrival of the law suddenly restored his authority. He thought he had me. He thought the money transfer looked like theft. He thought he had just played the ultimate card. I turned off the engine. I unbuckled my seatbelt. "Okay, Dad," I whispered. "Let's do this the hard way." I opened the car door and stepped out into the humid, flashing chaos of the night. The lead officer was already reaching for his handcuffs. He didn't see a daughter. He saw a suspect in a gala dress who had allegedly just wiped out a business. Behind him, my sister Savannah had moved closer. Her phone held high, the flash blinding me. She was sobbing loud. Theatrical sobs meant for the recording. "She ruined everything," she wailed to her followers. "My sister stole our family's money." Richard stood by the bumper, his chest heaving, a look of pure, unadulterated malice on his face. He smirked at me. It was a look that said, "I own you. You thought you could leave? I will burn you to the ground. Turn around." The officer barked, grabbing my wrist. His grip was tight, professional, and painful. "Hands behind your back." "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through the sirens like a razor. I didn't pull away. I stared him dead in the eye. "Before you arrest me for embezzlement, you need to look at the blue folder on my passenger seat." "Stop talking," Richard shouted, lunging forward. "She's lying. Just take her in." The officer paused. He was a veteran. He knew the smell of desperation, and Richard reeked of it. He looked at me, then at Richard, then at the open car door. "Check the folder," I repeated. "Unless you want to be sued for false arrest alongside my father." The officer paused, then took the blue folder from my car. Inside wasn't a resignation letter, it was a certified UCC-1 filing, notarized and stamped with my claim as senior secured creditor. Richard scoffed, calling it my diary, insisting I'd stolen from him. "No," I said. "I accessed collateral. 3 years earlier, when I paid off his debts, Richard offered equity. I refused. Equity sinks with the ship. I structured my $640,000 as a senior secured loan, instead collateralized by the business, inventory, liquor license, and building." Richard signed everything, without reading it. The officer's posture changed. "This says you have a lien on all assets." "Correct. I repossessed collateral legally. No theft." When Richard claimed I was an employee, I corrected him. "If you told dispatch that, you filed a false police report." The officer closed the folder, turned to Richard, and ordered him away from my property. When Richard realized the police were done protecting him, he switched from rage to begging, offering me 50, then 80% ownership. "Why would I own 80% of a corpse?" I said. "It's my venue," he cried. "No. The clause kicks in on termination. It's mine now." He was marched to his car, humiliated. Savannah followed, terrified. Afterward, I paid every staff member out of pocket and sent them home. Then I shut off the breakers, locked the doors, and walked away. Within months, I liquidated everything, paid small vendors who deserved it, and recovered my capital plus interest and fees. I used it to start a consulting firm specializing in distressed assets. Richard and Cynthia lost their house. Investors sued. Savannah hid offline. I kept none of their legacy but every ounce of my freedom. Sometimes I look at the party hat emoji that started it all. I'm no longer angry. They didn't push me out, they opened the door. So tell me, was I wrong to walk away that night? Or did they light the match themselves?